The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back, comfortably zoned with the Zigzag Man in Alameda, California, and I am privileged today. I have a returning guest whose company on the air, off the air, any way you want to put it, I thoroughly enjoy. He is Stephen Goldleaf. How are you, sir?
I am absolutely fine, Ralph. I am doing great.
Good. Love to talk ball with you. You are a writer, a statistician. You worked for and or with Bill James. And that recently changed. You're no longer doing that. Changes are stressful, but always seem to work out for the best. Do you agree?
Well, this one was particularly exciting. This is one of the rare times in my life that I've been unambiguously fired. So that was, there was a little bit of drama involved in that. And I was actually very happy to be fired because I was thinking that I was at the end of my run anyway. But it was kind of abrupt. So I've been publishing a couple of things on Authory because I had some columns saved up. And I wanted to make sure I could get them read because I didn't have any place other than Bill James Online to publish them on. But it's been good for me because I've actually been hard at work on a novel that I'm 26 chapters into. It's probably going to end up being around 33, 34 chapters. So
wow.
I've been able to use the time really well, but not so much in writing about baseball.
Okay. What is your novel? What is the synopsis of your novel?
Well, this is kind of funny because I actually am in a legal bind. I have to acquire the rights. Let me just, I'll summarize the situation, which I've been told is more interesting than the novel itself. But a friend of mine, a guy I've written a lot about, died in the middle of writing this novel. And for 20 years, his heirs have been unwilling to let it be published, the part that he'd written, and unwilling to let anybody finish it. But when I retired from teaching and now retired from baseball writing, I realized, well, I've got a lot of time in my hands, so I can try it, and I can present it as a fait accompli. I'll finish it, and I'll give it to his heirs and say, okay, about releasing the rights to this book and these characters. But basically, it's set in the last year of John Kennedy's administration, and there's a lot of fine detail that basically puts you right back in the early 60s, which is pretty much my wheelhouse.
Mine too. Late 50s, early 60s in terms of political awareness. You were just formed. You're a little younger than me, but I mean, in those years you were forming your ideology. They were very important years. Give me a little something about it to keep the interest. Something a teaser, so to speak.
Well, the teaser is that this guy who started the book was one of Bobby Kennedy's speechwriters in real life, and he wrote a couple of chapters about how he got the job and how he kept the job, and that was a struggle in itself because this guy was a real security risk. So the FBI was running a background check on him, and he knew he could only hold the job for until the background check was done, because they would fire him as he was. So
Whoa.
this is sort of, speed dial kind of gig, where this guy was actually one of the few people who was holding down a government job for the salary. Most people who took government jobs took huge pay cuts to, leave their law firm or wherever they earn money.
Right.
Work for the government.
Do you mind if I ask what the security risk was? My curiosity gets the better of me.
Oh, I'd be happy to talk about it. This guy was a multiple security risk. Not only was he a fairly serious lefty, but he'd been committed to psychiatric institutions twice, and he was how to put this delicately, he was a profound drinker.
All right. If you're going to do something, you might as well be damn good at it. That's the way I look at it.
I ended up about what it takes to be a speechwriter a lot. And that was, to me, one of the most interesting things about it, how you go about writing speeches for somebody else to deliver in his voice and not yours. And he sort of pushed Bobby Kennedy to create a lot of civil rights discussion that Kennedy was a little bit leery about speaking out on. So he sort of pushed the envelope on that, and I think that was, probably the best thing he did in his year working for the Justice Department.
Okay. What did he do after he left government?
Well, he did what he did before he left government. He'd written several novels before, and he'd written several novels after. He basically was a writer's writer, and that was where I got to know him. He was my professor briefly in graduate school, and that's where he and I met. And then I wrote a book.
Wow.
And that's why I became so deeply entrenched in his work.
You mentioned something. He was a profound lefty, and everybody thinks of the Kennedys being left-wing. That didn't come naturally to them, did it?
Well, half of this book is him really bitching about the Kennedys, just saying that, they're solidly in the middle. They won't do anything. They won't make any commitments. They won't, fight the good fight with any, regressive politicians. And truth to tell you, one of the things I tried to make clear was what the political atmosphere was at the time. You had half of the Democratic senators were from the South, and the South elected Kennedy in 1960, so he would be cutting his own throat by getting into fights with them. But on the other hand, obviously, you know which way the pendulum of history was swinging, and that was an inevitable fight that somebody had to have. And it turned out that Lyndon Johnson was the one who ended up having.
Exactly. He got it through politically. He rammed it through. But if Kennedy had stayed alive, I don't think it would have gotten through as quickly.
Or at all.
Or at all. Yes, absolutely. Now, when John was killed, Bobby's was this around the time when he was a speechwriter, after John was killed? Because that's where the left wing comes in. I think Bobby made a radical change at that point.
Yeah, well, this book basically takes in the scope of all of 1963. It begins actually on New Year's Day in 1963, and it ends probably close to Christmas. So, the Kennedy assassination was right in there towards the end.
Do you have a personal view of, as far as I'm concerned, I think it was Hoover and Johnson in some way in cahoots. But do you have an idea of, in your own mind, can't be sure, and there's no right or wrong, of who actually killed John Kennedy?
Well, that's actually one of the key things that I'm right in the middle of bringing out right now. I don't know if you've heard of this theory in a book called Mortal Era, but I actually came across this because Bill James recommended it to me very strongly, and the thesis of the book, which is backed up by a lot of heavy-duty ballistic and forensic reports that I really can't penetrate, is that Kennedy might have been assassinated, which is to say that he might have been killed by a Secret Service bullet that went off inadvertently. And that's not to say Oswald wasn't shooting. He was. But the fatal shot, this guy contends, was actually an accidental discharge from a new gun by a new Secret Service agent who was in the car in back of Kennedy's. And this is kind of what I'm going to be bringing out in the climax of the book.
The coincidence between Oswald's shooting and that happening, was it in response? Did he draw in response to Oswald's shooting?
He was just reaching for his gun when he heard
okay.
the first shot.
Okay.
So it's not
wow.
It's just something that happened in the course of basically the whole world going crazy in about 2 seconds.
Whoa.
Yes. Recommend.
What a fascinating book you're writing.
Well, I think so, and we'll see if it ever gets published. But yeah, I'm hoping this is going to be a year well spent, and I'm hoping to get it finished by the end of the year.
Coincidentally, I completed my first book in September, and I had it self-published on Amazon. And I might suggest you communicate with Noel Hind, who's a Facebook friend of mine, and led me to Amazon and has helped me in so many ways in transferring the manuscript to Amazon Publishing. You have so much more control, and we can get into that another time. But I'm wondering how your communique will go on with the original author's family. Have you made inroads at all, or are you just going to save it to the end?
Yeah, I'm going to pretty much wait until I finish the book and I'm happy with it, because if I'm not happy with it, there's no real point. But so far, I'm pretty pleased. Now, this Noel Hind, he's the guy who wrote the book about the Giants?
Yes, indeed. He the Polo Grounds. He wrote a book about the Dodgers, Ebbets Field, last day in Ebbets Field, and he has been a wonderful friend. And introduce yourself to him on Facebook, or I'll introduce you to. He is not only a baseball writer, but he's a crime writer, a mystery writer, and his dad was a writer, and he republishes a lot of his dad's stuff on Amazon. He's an absolute whiz, and he's been a godsend to me. So it's nice to be able to give him some credit on the podcast for making my dream come true. And so I know what it's like for the first time in my life, to complete a book and have it published. And so what can I tell you? The book, if you're curious, is called Comfortably Zoned in a Vat o' Pine Tar. And it basically, we've put together, George Grimm, my co-writer, and I, we've transcribed interviews that we've done on podcasts, and we put it together, and Peter Golenbach calls it brilliantly written. And he also wrote a foreword for the book. Mark Littell wrote another foreword for the book. And I'm excited. What can I tell you?
Yeah, it sounds fascinating. Moment for you, and it's always exciting when you work hard on a book and it finally gets out in print.
Yeah, absolutely. Or you can work hard at anything and it becomes completed. Whatever your passion is, whatever you're doing, completion is always nice, because people don't realize they see a book, well, you jotted some stuff down, and so it's on every level. It's the editing, where to put the commas, what to leave in, what to take out, what stories do you think are best. I know what you're going through right now, and the fun of it, and the challenge of it. So keep it up. I know you're out of the baseball business per se, but I thought of something I would like to talk to you about, and that is the 4 or 5 great pitchers in our era, and I say late 50s, early 60s: Marichal, Gibson, Sandy Koufax, and there was 1 or 2 others that I was thinking of. Who was the greatest pitcher, of our time, in your opinion?
Well, that's actually a pretty easy one for me, because not only is Koufax my sentimental choice, I've got a lot of biographical things in common with him, including going to the same high school and going to the same
Lafayette High School
and the same Jewish community center in Brooklyn. But recently I've actually read a Bill James column in which he made a very strong case that I buy into, that Koufax was head and shoulders above pretty much everybody in the history of the game. What he did in terms of his domination, his endurance. He essentially pitched over 300 innings a season when he was healthy, and the effect that he had. He essentially, James argues, won 3 pennants for the Dodgers single-handed. That if he weren't there, there's no question in his mind. He, made a pretty good case for it. Koufax just dominated the game so much that the Dodgers, he contends, wouldn't have even come close to winning a single pennant in the period that we think of as their most dominant period.
But it was his greatness, obviously, because of the arthritis in his shoulder, was 4 or 5 years. Can I play the devil's advocate with Bob Gibson as an example? If you want to, his feet, they're changing the mound height. Somebody wrote recently was equivalent to them extending the 3-point lane for Wilt Chamberlain. So that in itself, and that 1 year that he had, I think it was 67, because in 68 they changed it. That 1 year of dominance, combined with the longevity of his career, could that case be made for, in your mind, for Bob Gibson?
Well, there's a lot that goes into that. I mean, obviously, Gibson had a lot of things working for him in 1968, including, none of the batters being privileged enough by the conditions to be that formidable as opponents. But so I'm saying Gibson's peak sort of looks better than it was relative to the league. And there's a great case to be made. The more you emphasize career length and overall healthiness in a pitcher, but I guess Koufax just goes a little bit beyond pretty much everybody's minimum of how long you need to have a consistent peak. And, some people would say that it's got to be at least 3 years. Some people would say it's got to be at least 4 years. Some people would say 5 years. But, nobody will really argue that you need a peak longer than, 5 or 6 years to be considered a non-fluke. And that's kind of, the test that Koufax passes. And, you can make a really good case, not only for Gibson. I think Marichal makes, a very strong case for himself. And
right.
Drysdale in there, and you get a little bit later, and you're talking about Tom Seaver. These are all, fabulous pitchers beyond compare. But the interesting thing was that I think James was seeking to demonstrate that Koufax was not superior, and he did the work and, crunched a lot of numbers and decided, you know what? There's really no question but that, Koufax at his peak was way above any of these other players at their peaks. Now, of course, if you take non-peak into account, then, Koufax was pretty much a mediocrity. But I think that's what his argument was based on, was just, Koufax being completely dominant, not only in his time, but basically on any time.
A little assist from Norm Sherry, my old friend, when I was doing Topps baseball cards and signing players in the minor leagues. I befriended Sherry, who was coaching and managing in the Giants system at the time. And there was another guy who was a tremendous, and we're both Jewish, so I take pride in Sandy's accomplishments and the Sherry brothers' accomplishments as well. Tell me something about Sandy Koufax on a personal level, his personal level, that we don't know. Something about him that may surprise us.
Well, actually, the one personal bit of information was that I used to have a girlfriend who lived in the building of a woman on 83rd Street in Bensonhurst, who Koufax was dating when he was a Brooklyn Dodger. And
oh, wow.
She would tell me that all the kids in the neighborhood who were just, obviously fascinated by any Brooklyn Dodger, much less one who came from that neighborhood, and they would all sort of crowd around her door just for a peek at Koufax coming to pick this woman up and drop her off. And I spoke a little bit about this to Jane Levy, who wrote biography of Koufax, a fabulous book. I mean, she's just a wonderful writer. She's written biography of Koufax and of Mickey Mantle and of Babe Ruth. And
Babe Ruth now, yeah.
Better than the other. I mean, just absolutely first-rate biographies. And I asked her if she'd come across this woman's name who he used to go out with, and she said that she hadn't. So I felt, all right, now I've done something that even Jane Levy hasn't been able to pick up on, which is to detail some particulars about Koufax's early love life.
Nice. Also clears up a little bit. There have been some rumors over the years of Koufax's preferences. So nice to hear him going out with him.
This came up as a kind of I think a smear that you're referring to, where people were trying to suggest that Koufax might not be as heavy in his loafers as one might wish.
That's well put. You're definitely a writer, a wordsmith, as opposed to light in his loafers, which was the implication. How did that get started?
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny. I mean, I just think that anybody who spends a lot of his life as a bachelor is going to hear this. I mean, certainly you heard this about Mike Piazza, right, when he was, the most eligible ball player going, that same kind of, rumors started. And obviously one of the things that, makes contemporary life more pleasant is that nobody actually cares about that stuff anymore.
Exactly. What an age we live in. Changes. Are you adapting as well to your changes as, not that you're letting on, but is there trepidation, that anxiety? How are you handling it?
Well, I guess, we were talking a little bit off the air about this whole business about the change in my enjoyment in baseball. And I'd actually written an article called How Sabermetrics Has Ruined Baseball. And I guess that means how it's ruined baseball for me. But, obviously there's a certain amount of clickbait to that title because I'm being deliberately provocative. But I think there's also an element of truth to it that, here's my argument, that what I've realized in the last couple of years is that sabermetrics, which is obviously something that I'm associated with as a writer for 6 years for Bill James Online, is a great thing. I think that the analysis and the close detail that people devote to baseball that is all fueled by sabermetrics has been a great thing because we get much more intelligent and much less opinionated barfly sort of discussion going if you can actually analyze what's happening on the field. But the downside to that is that the one thing that it's done that I think is ruinous is to elongate the actual game. So that if you get things like, I'll give you one quick example, that when we were growing up, if on any level, if a batter was standing in at the plate and he was letting a lot of pitches go by and, working out walks and, as we call it now, running up the pitch count, you would yell at the guy. You would, tell him, come on, swing at something. Let's get going here. Let's get a move on. And and now the wisdom has shifted completely in the other direction, so that it is completely defensible and even virtuous, even necessary, for somebody to take as many pitches as is humanly possible. And this is directly a result of sabermetric studies, that they've decided that, getting the pitcher out of the ball game earlier, the starting pitcher, is a good thing. You want to get as many relief pitchers into the game as you possibly can. You want to, wear on the pitcher's arm by taking as many pitches early in the count as you possibly can. And you want to, and anyway, I can go on, but explaining why people think this is virtuous, and it very well may be. But the effect of that overall is to take what used to be a nice 2-hour diversion and turn it into a 3 or a 4 or sometimes a 5-hour ball game that is just wearisome to watch. And the emphasis is, of course, on winning. You're saying, well, if you do this, if you take a lot of pitches, you're going to win more ball games, and that's the whole idea. And I can't argue with that. I think that makes perfect sense, that taking pitches may well add to a team's ability to win. But if both sides are doing it, then it doesn't really add to anything, does it? It just makes the game longer. It just means that the average pitch count, which may have been as low as 2 or 3 pitches per batter when we were younger, has now gone up to 5 or 6 pitches per batter during each at bat. And I just find that baseball has become tedious, that it just becomes at times unwatchable. And I don't think there's anything that can be done about it. I mean, you're not going to tell people, well, don't do the things that make your team win more ball games. That's obviously not going to be a winning argument. But on the other hand, I just see it as one of the things that has made the game difficult to sit through is just the length of time that each at-bat, each inning, each game requires of somebody, just out to be entertained.
Good, very good point. Let me throw in my gripe. My gripe is that shifting, although it's a strategic must be or it's necessary, it takes away the traditional great defensive play, the double play, the a guy doing what a second baseman doing what a second baseman should do, a third baseman doing what a third baseman should do. And I don't think it improves the you go to a game, boy, I saw 3 great plays. You don't see that because defense is basically hitting into where they're playing you.
Yeah, it's a matter of...
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that what you're talking about is positioning, right?
Right.
Again, when we were growing up, it used to be that the fielders would decide where they were going to position themselves based on their instincts or the phases of the moon or whatever was going on in their head. And now they've got this down to a science. So the fielders don't really decide what they're going to do based on, I don't know, how the batter is standing in the box, but they've got, charts that they read vigorously before each game and decide exactly where they're going to play each player based on where the likelihood is that he's going to hit the ball. And again, you can't really argue with this because it's successful, but it's awfully dull. As you said, it deprives you of a lot of stuff. One of the other things that goes on here, I figured out at one point, Ralph, that there were fewer triples in Major League Baseball than there had ever been before. That just the incidence, the number, was cut down by something like 40% from when I started watching the game. And I posited that the reason for that is that stretching a double into a triple is risky, and it's often, up to my mind, watching somebody make third base on a very close play is one of the most exciting plays in baseball, right? Because you got the ball.
Yes, exactly.
And the outfielder's arm being tested to the maximum, and him, there being a close tag play. But somebody figured out, and again, I can't fault the guy for coming to this conclusion. I'm sure he's right, but somebody decided that the risk-reward ratio was just too much. That, in other words, I observed during the World Series at some point, I think it was when the Astros were in it a few years ago, that everybody who hit a ball that I thought could have been three bases just stopped standing up at second base, didn't even draw a throw from the outfielder because it was just too negative a risk-reward ratio. And I'm saying, again, that's maybe good baseball. It may be how you win, but I'm deprived of watching what I think is the single most exciting play in the game. A fast runner trying to make third base on an outfielder's arm. That's basically what I want to watch in a baseball game, and I don't really get to see that very much at all anymore.
You know what I used to like was get them on, get them over, get them in. And there was a strategy behind hitting behind the runner, behind, even if you make an out, you make a successful out. It's not all strikeout or home run. I miss the game of strategy. To bunt, I'm going to miss the National League not having a DH when they're going to invariably decide to eliminate or to kill the game in the National League as we know it. That's the best way I can think of it.
You can always be optimistic about this and just say, well, maybe I'll be dead by the time they do that, and you won't actually get to see that.
Believe it or not, I've had days when that's the most optimistic thought I can think of. So let's end this on a goal that we can both share. Not be dead till we come back and do another podcast together. How about that?
All right, that sounds good. I think I have at least one more in me.
Okay, just agree to that, not be dead, and I'll agree to it on my side, and that'll be our pact till next we meet. Beautiful. Stephen, I love conversing with you.
My pleasure, Ralph. Really my pleasure.
Music to my ears. Till that time, Stephen, and thank you for listening, everybody. It's the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tycho, the weak link of it all, and the guest is my friend, Stephen Goldleaf. Thanks again. Happy trails.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned Network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.